Welcome to EFT Nation, your home for all things tapping. For show notes and resources, please visit EFTtappingtraining.com. We are your tapping hosts. I'm Alina Frank.
And I'm Craig Wiener. The information provided in this podcast is not a substitute for counseling or medical advice. The information presented here is meant to inspire and educate listeners, but are not guarantees of any kind.
Alrighty. We have a topic that I have wanted to cover for a while now, and this seems like the appropriate time to cover it.
Yeah, it is the time.
Yeah.
So you have been wanting to talk about and shared with me helping people understand trauma triggers, trauma responses, how
Right.
people respond in the moment in perhaps intense, exaggerated, a variety of different ways. And boy, we are living in a time in which that's pretty ubiquitous. It's everywhere. I mean, as we're recording this, we're in, year 2 of the COVID pandemic. And, every day.
Entering year 3.
Entering year 3. We are every day. Yeah, right. And so we have been living in a state of heightened stress. Everybody is dealing with that in different ways. It is affecting youth. It is affecting people's well-being, mental health and well-being everywhere.
Yeah.
And that is quite natural given this prolonged period of stress.
Yeah.
But we're really not focusing on just stress responses today, right?
Well, okay, yeah. And so what you're talking about is maybe the collective, like the collective stressors?
Living during COVID, we are talking about the collective and how the pandemic is affecting everybody. So, like 4 in 10 adults in the United States have reported symptoms of anxiety and depression, and that's up from like 1 in 10 6 months before it.
Okay.
People are having problems sleeping. There are issues with food and weight gain and increase in addiction and alcohol consumption and substance use. All of these things.
Brain fog, exhaustion, boredom.
So many different things. And grief.
Yes.
Loss.
Yes.
Of course.
And I was just reading about the amount of people that are feeling guilt and shame over being anything that they wanted to do or their old life, or thinking that survivor's guilt, expressing that I want to be whatever, getting a meal in a restaurant that's now closed. I mean, the feeling of guilt that goes along with like wanting those old things is pretty high among the population as well.
Okay. And beyond just the stressors are the very real traumas that people are also facing during this.
Sure.
Right? People that are getting very sick and landing in the hospital, losing loved ones.
Yep.
Right? To the epidemic. So there are very real traumas. People that are working in first responders, people that are working in hospitals and healthcare that are having to watch and feel out of control with being able to help people. And such great loss. So there are very real traumas that are being experienced by people during this time as well. So that's happening. But yet that's not exactly what we want to talk about, right? What we want to start to...
Well, we want to acknowledge that that's what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. That's what's going on. It's just not the focus. What we want to talk about is something that's showing up during this time in a heightened way, but also can show up at any day.
Because you can have control over this. What we're about to share, you have much more control over. You don't have a lot of control over what's happening in the pandemic.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about trauma triggers. Right? So let's talk about trauma triggers, trauma responses.
Yeah, I wanted to do this trauma triggers and trauma responses podcast episode because I've seen the term trauma response flung about everywhere, especially in the last 6 months. It's just been showing up everywhere. Oh, that's a trauma response. And so I wanted to get down to, okay, what actually is that? Let's just not be flippant about it. Let's uncover what it really does mean and what you can do about it.
So let's talk about triggers first.
Okay.
Okay. So when different names for a trauma trigger is a trauma stimulus, a trauma stressor, a trauma trigger, a trauma reminder. And this really is some sort of stimulus, something that happens or is experienced that prompts within a person an involuntary or subconscious recall of some previous traumatic experience that they had sometime earlier in their life.
Okay.
Right?
So conscious and unconscious.
Sure. Yeah. But typically, triggers when they first happen are more often than not subconscious when they first happen.
Yeah.
Okay. But we can certainly learn to be more observant and witnessing, and that's going to be part of the healing process here. The stimulus, it doesn't have to be frightening or scary necessarily, and it can be directly or indirectly reminiscent of some earlier traumatic incident. You know, it could be the smell of something, the color of something, the sound of a person's voice, the way they looked, the action they took. And the triggers can be very subtle, and they can be very obvious as well. And every person has usually had some level of trauma in their life, and some certainly much more than others.
I think what I saw was 70% of the adult U.S. population has experienced some trauma in their lifetime. And when you talk about people that are in the public health system, that number goes up to 90%.
Okay. And then, of course, it depends on which definition of trauma we're using, but I think that's pretty accurate. When we experience some sort of trauma, especially something that threatened our life, threatened our well-being, threatened our sense of safety, what happens is that it gets coupled with, in the brain body, with different aspects that are related to what happened. The smell that was in the air, the location we were at, the type of person, a male of a certain age that looked a certain way, or a teacher or something like that. And so what happens is that this coupling happens, creating triggers later in our lifetime that have this connection to the earlier event in which we felt unsafe. Okay.
Well, yeah. Or I also want to say that it's not just that particular five senses. It could also be the way you felt emotionally. So so right now, you just have to open up social media to see how many people are being triggered on a regular basis. And it could be that person feels a feeling of being out of control. Someone's telling them what to do. That kind of thing is also a trigger. Well, I mean, a term like the trigger stimulus could be just how someone is making me feel right now.
Right. Making me feel and or connected to another time in which, maybe in a very unsafe way, I was ordered to do something that I didn't want to do or didn't feel safe doing.
Exactly.
And now, we're not saying yay, nay, whatever, but around the world, there are different mandates. There are mask mandates, there are vaccine mandates, there are lots of things in which, in the interest of public health, there are different ways that companies and governments and countries are regulating and with regard to the pandemic. And it's bringing up, for many people, a very intense response, not only because of what's happening currently, but because it can be tied to an experience that they had when they were younger.
Absolutely.
That deepens and multiplies, and it's all like adding to the embers that were already there.
Yeah, especially when it comes to my body, right? When we're talking about safety, it's like all about my body. So now you're asking me to do something connected to my body that I that feels unsafe, heightened possibly by events in your past in childhood that made you feel like that your body was being threatened. But I'll say on the other side of that, for people that are being triggered by the people that aren't doing those things, and people that are vaccine hesitant or do not want to take the vaccine, there's a feeling of you are being selfish. And that absolutely can be connected to traumas in childhood where your father, your mother was being selfish and not caring about you.
Right.
So
and
just on every side.
And experiences of abandonment.
Exactly.
Experience of not being cared for.
You're not hearing me, right? All of that.
And so you can start to see how the early origins of so many of the heightened reactions that are being experienced right now
Yeah.
can be fed by not just the current circumstance,
Right.
but being triggers that are coupled to earlier traumas and traumatic experiences earlier in life.
Right. Can't you just avoid it all and just stay home and
Yeah, you know
shut
what?
the door?
Isn't it interesting that, for example, very common within people that have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, but many others as well without that. One of the strategies that's attempted in order to feel more regulated and not in a heightened state all the time is avoidance behaviors.
Yes.
Right? Is on one hand the attempt to try to avoid situations and places and people that cause that triggered response, which we'll talk more about. And yet, we also have these phenomenon like the compulsion to repeat. We're almost pulled to it like a moth to a flame.
It's going to happen.
And yet there's avoidance as well. So there's often a back and forth of trying to avoid, but then getting sucked in and not being able to avoid.
Yeah. For me, that's the meaning. That's the meaning of like a trigger. It's like the trigger happens just like blah. It's like you splat on the floor. It's not like you plan it or you can try to avoid it. You can try to plan to do things in a way that won't get you triggered. But if it's there, if the connection is there, you're gonna get it one way or another.
Yeah, and there's so many different trauma responses that people can have. They can be just so varied.
Yeah.
Right? So, we're going to go over some of them. So just like we were saying, how do you know, for example, can you know in a situation that what is causing you to respond in a heightened way?
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean heightened, like heightened emotionally, heightened defensively, heightened reactively,
physiologically,
or heightened physiologically, or totally disconnected as well.
Yeah. And
going numb to and avoidance, etc. So we have, this kind of positive coupling or enhanced coupling and diminished coupling. This, it can go in both directions. But when we look at that, it could be just that somebody did something that really bothers you. But the question always is, why?
Yeah.
Why, when we have strong reactions, does it so bother us? And it's so often, when we do EFT with people and we're working with them, to find out that there's a reason that they feel so strongly about it that's connected to something earlier.
There's always a reason. There's always a reason. I have to say that again and again. There's always a reason. It's not just that you are feeling the sense of injustice or all of that is true. But if you have a strong physiological, emotional response, there's something back there that it's connected to.
Yeah. So, just some of the ways that you might be noticing for yourself or your friends or loved ones, etc., is just the being so easily moved toward anger or irritation or bothered about small things.
Well, you might think it's a small thing, but it's a big thing for me.
Exactly. So, who can say whether that is a small, you have to look at that for yourself. And
well, the miracle of EFT for me is to easily get beyond that superficial thing, and your subconscious mind will connect you to what it really is about.
Okay. So what are other ways? You may notice kind of a sensory sensitivity is going on for you. And what does that mean? That it's that more than typical for you, you're getting overstimulated. You're getting more easily bothered by noises or body sensations, things that typically don't bother you. You're like in a height, like it's like your car alarm is set to a very low setting, and just a mere brushing of the car sets the alarm off.
Right.
And so, you know what? I noticed we were at a small gathering, and just everybody talking at one time. It wasn't that many people. It was only like 6 or 7 people there. I needed to just be out of that room. It was just too much. It was too much volume. It was too much intensity, too much even space, even with a few people. And so I just noticed that I needed to step away. And it's becoming aware that, okay, what's going on right now? What is this bringing up? What kind of sense of lack of safety, or what is this triggering that I can't just be in the presence of this where normally I could?
Right.
You may notice a sudden shifting in low mood. That could be that you're shifting into just being exhausted, or feelings of depression or grief or hopelessness or worthlessness that you're moving into that isn't typically you, right? You may notice on the other end, heightened states of intensity, like that you're just getting caught in worry cycles a lot. You're feeling jittery. You're easily startled. You're feeling more anxious. You're ruminating by letting your mind just like run over and over the same thoughts or worries or memories or ideas or fears. The feeling that that something is just wrong. You're having intrusive thoughts that you seemingly can't control. You're moving into fight or flight symptoms more. Your heart's racing more. Your palms are sweating. Your shortness of breath. You're having problems sleeping. And all of these things are either, moods, behaviors, physiological body reactions and sensations that are not typical for you. And they're becoming enhanced, perhaps the longer in the pandemic, but the more that it may be triggering feelings of that fear that life won't be okay. Things that may be mirroring things early in your life, and especially during childhood, that those themes are starting to kind of sneak up underneath you in certain situations, more clearly are making associations to those earlier traumatic times.
Can we, you know me, I'm all about getting specific. Can we actually have like real life scenarios here that are like clear trauma responses? And so I will start. Let's just go through the categories. So when it comes to work productivity, a trauma response could be procrastinating, avoiding a call.
Wait a minute. Why would procrastinating, what does that have to do with trauma?
The fear so connected to procrastination is always fear. And so identifying what the fear is about. So I'm afraid that if I do this, the consequences will be X. And that is, it feels like it's about only the current situation, but I guarantee you it's connected to something in the past. So that's a trauma. Okay. So that could be a trauma response.
Okay. So in other words, so not everybody that procrastinates, it's a trauma response. However, it could be related to a fear. But what if I have a fear that what I turn in not only isn't going to be enough,
right,
but that I'll be shamed in front of my co-workers.
Exactly.
And that's what's leading me to procrastination, just like the time that my high school teacher shamed me for the paper that I handed in. And how often are we making the connection that I'm procrastinating at work because of something that a teacher did in high school?
No, or in second grade when you had to do a math problem on the board.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's an example in the work realm. So let's think about how a trauma response might show up in relationship. Trauma response in relationship could look like avoidance of having a serious disagreement with someone. So saying what you feel instead of trying to just keep the peace.
Okay. So in other words, the trauma response is placating, is not asking for what you want or for what you need.
Yes.
Of just kind of swallowing that and being
because
fine, whatever.
Something bad might happen if I do speak up, if I do say my piece, if I do ask for what I want.
Because for some, the last time that I asked her what I really wanted, which was that blue Schwinn bicycle when I was 8 years old, and my dad yelled at me for being selfish when we were going through, finances were a hard time.
Right.
And so I learned that my needs come second, or last or whatever. Yep. And so my ability in a relationship to ask for what I really want is really diminished, and that can be a trauma response.
Yep. So at the beginning of the new year, we always there's a great article on our website about decluttering, and we know that energetically it's like it bogs you down. So start the new year with decluttering. If you can't declutter, if you're a hoarder, if your friends and your family say, hey, it's time you start getting rid of some of this stuff, and you can't, that could be a trauma response.
Because
it could be connected to anxiety you have every time that you had a series of moves throughout your childhood brings up anxiety. The feeling that if I throw something away, I will need it because when I was 3 years old, I lost my binky. Those kinds of connections are there with every person that I've worked with on that particular issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, all of those, again, just bringing it, in the current circumstances, somebody saying that you have to do this.
Yes.
Whether it's a store owner saying da-da-da, whether it's a flight attendant saying, etc.
Yeah.
We're seeing, just innumerable aggressive physical attacks that are really at a heightened level, being told you can't do this or you have to do this.
Right.
And I promise you that kind of strong reaction has an earlier history that may or may not be known. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the work that EFT is being able to make those connections.
Yes.
So that you can have choice in every situation possible, and start to heal those past circumstances so that you have a greater variety of options and choices about those current circumstances, and a lessened likelihood of getting reactive, defensive, and triggered in a great variety of situations that make you feel that way.
Right.
Because of the way that somebody reacted, or because of the way that I'm feeling in my body that's still connected to, emotionally, physically, to those past events.
Right. So what I want to say and underscore here is, you are not responsible for what happened to you as a child. You're not responsible for the traumas that happened in your life. However, you can accept the responsibility for what you do about it now. And so using EFT is a powerful tool that you can use on your own or with a practitioner. So let's talk about what are the uses of EFT when we're talking about these triggers.
As we do that, I just want to add one caveat as well, is that so often as adults, we look back to, we keep talking about these childhood traumas, etc. The tendency for so many people is to minimize them.
Absolutely.
Right? To minimize, so many people had it so much worse. And it wasn't that bad. It's not like I got hit with a baseball bat. It's not. Right. But we're always looking, when we do that, we're looking through the adult eyes. Mm-hmm. Right? We're forgetting and disconnecting from the actually felt experience of what it was like to be the child experiencing that. Right. Which was much more impactful and traumatic to a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or whatever than through the eyes of an adult looking back at that thing going, oh, that wasn't that bad. So just know that if you've done that or you're doing that, it's very common, but it doesn't allow you to go back and heal that because you think, oh, that wasn't that big a deal. I don't have to do anything with that.
Right.
Right. So when we use EFT, when working around these kind of trauma responses and these trauma triggers, first there needs to be a willingness, right? An openness to just start to observe and be curious, right? There needs to be desire, somebody that doesn't care about how they're reacting, that's not going to be a good first step. So there's some willingness, like, why is this bothering me so much?
You could even use EFT on that, even though I'm not sure I want to do this. Yep. I'm scared of what I'll find underneath there.
Okay. Yeah. So one is that kind of curiosity and willingness to witness one's responses. Okay. Once you do that, EFT can be used in a variety of ways. One is just in the moment that one is feeling reactive, defensive, upset, angry, to just tap on, even though right now I watched that on the news, I read this, somebody said that, I'm feeling really angry, I feel it in my stomach, and I accept how I'm feeling, or I still accept myself. So self-regulation in the moment of upset, if you can recall to tap, can be very self-regulating and calming. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's one way, kind of a first aid response in the moment.
Sure. Tap and tap and tap and tap on the points without saying anything. Because the purpose of saying the statements is to bring this up to your conscious brain, but you're already feeling triggered, so go ahead and just tap. But if you want to go and further explore, okay, what is this really about? Then the act of EFT can actually just bring those thoughts, those connections. Your psyche will give you exactly what it might be about, but sometimes it's a little bit hidden, and that's when working with an experienced trauma-informed certified EFT practitioner really can help you make those connections.
Okay. But I would start not diving into those early memories.
No.
I would be using, if I'm realizing it, maybe I don't know that it's connected.
Yep.
Maybe I'm not sure. A good place to always start is the current events.
Yep.
Right? So in other words, how I'm feeling now in the moment, how I'm worried about what's going to happen next week or next month, right? I mean, holidays, what's going to happen? Am I going to be able to, I'm feeling helpless or hopeless around being able to get together with family. I mean, there's so many recent things. Or last month I was supposed to get together with them, and then Omicron hit and I had to cancel my trip, and that makes me feel hopeless, like this will never end, or that nobody cares, or whatever that is for you. So working recently, especially when there's the potential to be connected to trauma, is a safe beginning exploration to go through. And again, the importance of potentially working with a practitioner, especially when there's trauma involved, that's skilled and trauma informed, is so important. How do you find out if they're connected? Again, like Alina was saying, when you work and you use EFT to tune into, given this situation, how is it making me feel? Right? Starting to tap into, even though I don't know why simply canceling a trip is making me feel like, like life is hopeless, or that somebody doesn't care about me, or whatever it is, that as I start to tune into those feelings, EFT naturally tunes us into, okay, when else did I feel like this?
Yeah, you don't need to actively look for it. Bessel van der Kolk is now saying we shouldn't be looking for those original traumas. They'll come when they're ready. And if we just try to regulate ourselves and try to find the healing in the moment, our psyches, when they're ready, when they feel safe, will make those conscious connections for us.
And then working in a safe, gentle, trauma-informed way through those early events where we learned that when somebody says this is what the world is all about, and this is just the way it is and the way it'll always be, and we find these limiting or core beliefs that have us, are the lens that we look at everybody through, or the world through, even though it's just particular to that one specific time and circumstance. Right? And generalizes across how we live our life. Once we start healing that, then we could start to come back into our present life and observing and testing. Like, okay, now that I'm in situations in which somebody, denies me something or says no or whatever it is, that now I can start to look at, I know it's just this circumstance. It's not just because I'm worthless, or I don't deserve to be loved, or I don't deserve...
Well, what's interesting about what you said, when you really clear it with EFT, it just won't happen. I mean, we can all of a sudden say, oh my gosh, that is so bizarre. In this circumstance a year ago, I would have just flipped my lid, and now I don't care. Most of the time, it's so subtle that you don't even notice. You're just going about your life pretty happy. And someone, many times it'll be your friend, hey, you know what? That usually would have triggered you. And that's amazing that you're driving through traffic and you're just sitting here peacefully chatting with me. You would have been yelling at the driver in front of me, a few months ago. Right. So it can be that subtle. I know we want to observe and we want to see the change, but many times with EFT, it's so fast and so amazing that we don't see it. It's not that obvious, except that we're like happy, peaceful, engaged, connected.
Yep. And I want to say, living during these years of the pandemic and the prolonged stress for us, for our children, families, etc., it's okay to be gentle with ourselves. It's okay. We're not just avoiding triggers, but we're reducing our heightened state of stress, which is self-loving and is self-caring. So, consider taking, limiting or taking breaks from watching or reading or listening to the news or social media. Limit it, right? So you don't have to be continually triggered if you know that about yourself. Still, while doing the work that we're talking about, disconnect from your phone, TV, computer for a while, so you can just have some more breathing room and be in a calmer place more, and practice self-care, and that might be by getting more rest or sleep, by eating healthier, getting outside in nature, practicing whatever your stillness or movement work or meditation is, perhaps reducing your intake of alcohol, tobacco, etc. Be more conscious with taking time to unwind with activities you enjoy and connect with other people in a safe way. All of these ways of nurturing ourselves and reducing the triggers load allows us to have some more self-witnessing, allows us to be more regulated and do the work we need to do because we're not feeling so overwhelmed all the time.
Okay, one last education piece, because this list is good. All of the opposite of what Craig just said could be a trauma response. So really like hyper aware of what's happening in the news could be a trauma response. Yep. Really being connected to your phone could be a trauma response. Avoiding sleeping, resting, eating healthy, eating junk food instead. Not trying to avoid being quiet and meditative and starting a regular practice. Excessive alcohol or substance abuse, that could be a trauma response.
Right, because all of that, many of those can be related to like a hypervigilant response.
Exactly.
Because things aren't safe. And so if I keep on top of everything, if I read every article about Delta and Omicron and the newest PCR test and if I keep on top of all that, then I'll stay safe.
Exactly.
And so we can just notice that kind of trauma response in whatever way it shows up, manifests for you, and go, okay, what kind of self-loving self-care, what is really going to be most healing for me right now? Is being a little bit more aware that, or is maybe taking a break?
Yeah. Great podcast. I mean, I know it went longer than usual, but we just had a lot to say on this. So take care of yourselves, please.
Please do. Be safe.
Thanks for joining us today at EFT Nation. And remember that you can find show notes and previous episodes at EFTtappingtraining.com.